The galaxy held its breath. Few dared whisper the name of Marcus Strain, and those who did rarely did so in full confidence of their safety. Once a celebrated military commander, then a mercenary feared across every star cluster, Marcus had disappeared from public life 10 years ago. He was a ghost now, drifting among the forgotten sectors, a myth whispered in hushed tones, the deadliest human alive, and perhaps the most dangerous being in the galaxy. For over a decade, Marcus Strain had embraced solitude, abandoning the bloody tapestry of his past to raise his only daughter, Lila, on the quiet, unremarkable colony world of Kaler Prime. Kaler Prime was as peaceful as it was remote. The air smelled of wet earth after rainstorms, and the twin moons painted the night sky in soft silvers and blues. For Marcus, it was a sanctuary, a place where he had vowed never to take up a weapon again. Lila, now 17, was his pride and purpose. She had her mother's dark eyes and fierce spirit, and Marcus had dedicated himself to ensuring she grew up safe and loved. On Kaler Prime, he wasn't the butcher of Alginus IV, nor the Black Hand of Tartaros. He was just Lila's dad. But peace, as Marcus knew too well, was a fragile thing. It started with a shadow falling across the horizon. Lila was walking back from the settlement's central marketplace, a satchel of freshly picked fruit swinging in her hand. The dirt path crunched softly beneath her boots. The suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Her thoughts wandered, as they often did, to the stories her father refused to tell her, about the wars he had fought, the empires he had toppled. She had heard the rumors, of course. In a galaxy where news traveled faster than light, the legend of Marcus Strain was impossible to avoid. Yet to her, he was just a man who couldn't cook to save his life and insisted on teaching her how to fix old starship engines. She loved him, but she often wondered what secrets he kept buried beneath his quiet smiles and the lines etched into his face. She didn't notice the ship until its shadow swallowed the sun. It was massive, a looming predator that blotted out the sky. The air vibrated with the hum of its engines. Lila froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The vessel wasn't like the friendly freighters that occasionally visited Kaler Prime. This was something else entirely, sleek, black, and bristling with weaponry. A raider. Before she could scream, a beam of light shot down from the ship, enveloping her in a blinding cocoon. She felt her body lifted off the ground, her limbs paralyzed. The satchel fell from her hand, spilling fruit across the dirt. Then everything went white. Marcus felt it before he saw it. A deep, primal instinct honed by decades of warfare roared to life in his chest. He had been repairing the solar generator behind their modest home when the air shifted. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Dropping his tools, he sprinted toward the settlement, his boots pounding against the earth. He arrived just in time to see the raider ship vanish into the atmosphere, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and a scattered trail of fruit. His blood ran cold. "Lila," he shouted, his voice cracking. The only response was the wind rustling through the fields. A scream built in his chest, but Marcus didn't let it out. Instead, he knelt, picking up a single bruised fruit from the dirt. His hands trembled. He stared at the horizon, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stood, the calm before the storm. Marcus Strain had made a promise to himself, to Lila, to her late mother. He had sworn to leave his past behind, to never again become the monster he once was. But that promise died the moment his daughter was taken. The galaxy had stolen from him the only thing he had left to live for. And the galaxy was about to pay. The first thing Marcus did was retrieve the box. It was buried beneath their home, sealed in a compartment he had hoped never to open again. The biometric lock scanned his palm, and with a soft hiss, the lid slid open. Inside was a collection of weapons and gear, tools of war from a life he had tried to forget. A plasma pistol, an ion blade, an assortment of grenades, and most importantly, a sleek black data pad etched with faint scars from countless battles. He powered it on, his fingers moving with practiced precision over the interface. The screen flickered to life, displaying a map of known star systems and a wealth of encrypted data. The device was linked to a network of informants, mercenaries, and criminals he had cultivated during his years as a soldier and bounty hunter. He hadn't used it in over a decade, but Marcus doubted any of them had forgotten him. The first call went to an old associate, a former hacker named Salas who owed him more than a few favors. The holoscreen lit up, revealing the face of a wiry woman with bright green cybernetic eyes and a permanent smirk. Well, Salas drawled. "If it isn't the Black Hand himself. Thought you were dead, old man?" "Not yet," Marcus said, his voice cold as steel. "I need intel." Salas raised an eyebrow. Straight to business, huh? What's the job? A raider ship took my daughter from Kaler Prime. Black Hull Advanced Tech. I need to know who they are and where they're going. The smirk vanished from Solace's face. She leaned closer to the screen, her tone serious. You sure about this? You've been off the grid for a long time. Stirring up trouble now could, well, you know what it could mean. Marcus's eyes hardened. I don't care. Find them. Solace sighed, shaking her head. All right, give me a few hours. I'll see what I can dig up. While Solace worked, Marcus prepared. He donned his old combat armor, its once pristine surface now marred with scratches and burn marks. It still fit like a second skin. Strapping the plasma pistol to his hip and the ion blade across his back, he felt a grim sense of familiarity. The man he had tried to bury was clawing his way back to the surface, and Marcus welcomed him. By the time Solace called back, he was ready. Got a lead, she said. The ship matches the profile of a Vortex-class raider, likely outfitted by the Zarek Syndicate. They've been hitting fringe colonies hard lately, snatching up anyone they think might fetch a good price on the slave markets. Marcus's fists clenched. Where? Solace hesitated. Marcus, these aren't just pirates. The Zarek Syndicate, they're big. Dangerous. Even for you? Where? He repeated, his voice low and deadly. She sighed, then sent the coordinates. They've got a rendezvous point in the Neres Nebula. But Marcus, if you go after them, you're not coming back the same. You know that, right? He didn't answer. The call ended. Marcus stood on the bridge of his ship, the Erebus, staring at the swirling colors of the Neres Nebula. The vessel was an old warhorse, a relic of his mercenary days, but it was fast and lethal. He keyed in the coordinates and engaged the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into lines of light before disappearing altogether. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace, Marcus sat in the captain's chair, his mind a storm of memories and rage. He thought of Lila's laughter, the way she used to tease him for being overprotective. He thought of the bedtime stories he used to tell her, stories of brave heroes and daring adventures. He thought of the promises he had made to keep her safe. And he thought of the men who had taken her. What? Each time the Erebus dropped out of hyperspace, Marcus Strain was no longer a man seeking peace. He was a weapon honed and unleashed. The Zarek Syndicate had made a fatal mistake. They had taken his daughter. And Marcus Strain was coming for them. The Zarek Syndicate's base of operations wasn't on any official maps. Hidden deep within the Neres Nebula, it was protected by a labyrinth of swirling ion storms and gravity distortions that could tear apart most ships. It was the kind of place you didn't stumble upon by accident, and if you did, you didn't live to tell the tale. But Marcus Strain was no ordinary traveler, and the Erebus was no ordinary ship. He had spent the days leading up to his arrival in meticulous preparation. The Erebus was equipped with an advanced cloaking system, and its hull was reinforced to withstand the nebula's treacherous conditions. He had studied every scrap of intelligence Solace had provided, committing it to memory, patrol routes, access codes, syndicate personnel. There was no room for error. The lives of everyone involved, and, most importantly, Lila's life, depended on his precision. As the ship slipped into the nebula, Marcus sat at the controls, his jaw set like granite. The swirling clouds of ionized gas cast an eerie, multicolored glow across the Erebus's cockpit. Warning alarms occasionally blipped as gravity wells flared up, but Marcus navigated them with the ease of a man who had danced with death 1,000 times before. His mind was a razor, cutting through the fear and doubt that would have crippled a lesser man. Finally, the Syndicate's base came into view. A massive station built into the skeleton of an ancient asteroid, its structure sprawling like the web of a monstrous spider. Hundreds of ships, freighters, fighters and raiders, hovered around it, moving in carefully choreographed patterns. The station bristled with weapons, turrets, missile launchers and energy cannons designed to repel any assault. It was a fortress, impenetrable to all but the most determined. Good, Marcus thought. Determination was something he had in spades. The Erebus coasted toward the station's outer perimeter, its cloaking system active. Marcus had chosen his approach carefully, avoiding the main lanes of traffic. As he neared the base, he activated a small drone, a sleek, spherical device outfitted with stealth tech and a powerful transmitter. The drone slipped through the defenses like a ghost, latching onto the station's exterior. From there, it began hacking into the Syndicate systems, feeding Marcus the data he needed. It didn't take long for the drone to locate the station's detention wing. Lila was there, in a cell on the lower levels. Marcus felt a surge of relief tempered by icy resolve. She was alive. That was all that mattered. But now came the hard part, getting her out. The syndicate had a reputation for brutality. They were slavers, arms dealers, and worse, their ranks filled with the galaxy's worst scum. If they realized who Marcus was, or worse who Lila was, they would use her as leverage. He couldn't let that happen. Marcus leaned back in his chair, formulating his plan. He couldn't risk a full assault. The station's defenses would shred even the Erebus. Instead, he would have to infiltrate the station and extract Lila quietly. It was a delicate operation, one that required precision and stealth. And Marcus, for all his reputation as a ruthless killer, was nothing if not precise. He donned his infiltration suit, a sleek, black outfit designed to blend into the shadows. The material was reinforced with ballistic fibers, and the helmet came equipped with advanced optics and a breathing apparatus. Armed with his plasma pistol, ion blade, and a handful of gadgets, Marcus looked every inch the nightmare the syndicate had no idea was coming. The Erebus hovered in the shadow of a derelict freighter, its engines silent. Marcus slipped into the airlock, securing a tether line to his belt. With a press of a button, the airlock opened and he launched himself into the void. The silence of space was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of his suit's systems. He moved with practiced grace, using the tether to guide himself toward the station. The docking bay was heavily guarded, with armed sentries and automated turrets covering every angle. Marcus ignored it, heading instead for a maintenance hatch on the station's underside. The drone had provided the access codes, and Marcus keyed them in with swift efficiency. The hatch opened with a quiet hiss and he slipped inside. The interior of the station was a stark contrast to its ominous exterior. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of oil and unwashed bodies. Syndicate personnel moved through the halls, their conversations a murmur of slang and curses. Marcus avoided them with ease, his footsteps silent as death. He made his way toward the detention wing, relying on the map downloaded from the drone. The closer he got, the more heavily guarded the corridors became. Syndicate enforcers in bulky armor stood at intersections, their weapons at the ready. Marcus didn't engage them. He couldn't risk raising the alarm. Finally, he reached the detention wing. The security here was tighter than anywhere else on the station. Cameras lined the walls, and a pair of guards stood watch outside the main entrance. Marcus crouched in the shadows, observing them. They were big, heavily armed, and clearly bored. Perfect. He reached into his belt and retrieved a small device, a sound emitter designed to mimic the hiss of a leaking gas line. Activating it, he tossed it down the corridor. The device skittered across the floor, coming to rest near a junction. A moment later, it began to emit a soft, insistent hiss. The guards exchanged a glance. "What the hell is that?" one of them muttered. "Probably another damn maintenance issue," the other grumbled. "Go check it out." The first guard sighed, hefting his weapon as he moved toward the sound. The second stayed behind, his attention divided between the corridor and a handheld data pad. He didn't see Marcus until it was too late. The plasma pistol hissed softly as it fired, the bolt striking the guard square in the chest. He crumpled without a sound. Marcus moved swiftly, catching the body before it hit the floor and dragging it into the shadows. The second guard returned moments later, only to meet the same fate. Marcus disabled the cameras with a quick hack, then slipped through the entrance. The detention wing was a maze of cells, each one filled with captives. Most were silent, their eyes hollow, their spirits broken. Marcus scanned their faces as he moved, searching for Lila. His heart pounded in his chest, each step a test of his patience and resolve. And then he saw her. She was in a small cell at the end of the corridor, her face pale but defiant. She had been roughed up, a bruise marred her cheek and her clothes were torn, but she was alive. Relief washed over Marcus, but he didn't let it show. He approached the cell, his fingers flying over the control panel. The lock disengaged with a soft beep, and the door slid open. "Dad?" Lila's voice was a mixture of shock and disbelief. "It's me," Marcus said, his voice soft but firm. "We're getting out of here." She hesitated for a moment, then threw herself into his arms. Marcus held her tightly, his resolve hardening. The syndicate had taken her, hurt her, and for that they would pay. But first they had to escape. The alarm sounded just as they reached the maintenance hatch. Marcus's heart sank. The guards must have discovered the bodies. The station's corridors erupted into chaos, red lights flashing and klaxons blaring. Syndicate enforcers poured into the halls, their shouts echoing through the station. "Stay close to me," Marcus told Lila, drawing his plasma pistol. "No matter what happens, don't stop running." She nodded, her fear replaced by determination. Together, they plunged into the chaos, The way out now a gauntlet of fire and fury. Marcus moved like a storm, his shots precise and lethal. The syndicate had underestimated him, and they were about to learn why that was a mistake. Because when you took the daughter of Marcus Strain, you didn't just make an enemy. You signed your death warrant. The chaos inside the Zarek Syndicate station was absolute. Klaxons blared, casting everything in pulsing red light. The Syndicate's enforcers scrambled through the corridors, shouting orders and locking down every access point they could. But they were too slow. Marcus Strain and his daughter Lila were already moving, carving a path toward the Erebus. Lila stayed close to her father, her heart hammering in her chest. She had always known her dad was capable, but witnessing it firsthand was like watching a force of nature unleashed. Marcus moved with lethal precision, his plasma pistol firing in bursts that dropped Syndicate enforcers before they could react. His ion blade hummed menacingly, cutting through armor and flesh alike. Each step was deliberate, each strike calculated. Marcus wasn't just surviving, he was dominating. They reached an intersection where 4 heavily armed enforcers were setting up a barricade. Marcus didn't hesitate. He lobbed a microgrenade down the corridor, the device bouncing once before detonating in a flash of heat and light. The barricade disintegrated, and the enforcers were thrown back, their screams lost in the cacophony of alarms. Marcus pressed forward, his expression grim. "Dad, how are we getting out?" Lila asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "The same way I got in," Marcus replied without looking back. "We just have to reach the maintenance hatch. Once we're outside, the Erebus will handle the rest." Lila nodded, gripping the small blaster Marcus had handed her. She wasn't a soldier, but she was her father's daughter. If it came down to it, she wouldn't hesitate to fight. As they approached the maintenance hatch, Marcus's tactical instincts flared. Something was wrong. The corridor was too quiet, the Syndicate's response too disorganized. It felt like they were being herded. His suspicion was confirmed when a booming voice echoed through the station's comm system. "Marcus Strain. You've caused quite a mess," the voice said, dripping with mock amusement. "Did you really think you could storm my station and walk away unscathed?" "Who is that?" Lila asked, glancing nervously at the speakers. "Rex Kaler," Marcus said, his tone icy. "Leader of the Syndicate. And a dead man walking." Kaler laughed, the sound grating. "Bold words, Strain. But let's see how bold you are when you're surrounded." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had anticipated resistance, but Kaler's tone suggested something more. "Trap." He scanned the corridor, his sharp eyes catching the faint glimmer of tripwires and the subtle movement of hidden turrets. "Back," he ordered, pulling Lila behind cover just as the corridor erupted in a storm of gunfire and explosions. The hidden turrets sprang to life, their barrels spitting energy bolts that turned the walls to slag. Syndicate enforcers emerged from side passages, their weapons trained on the father and daughter. "Stay low and follow me," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Do exactly as I say." Lila nodded, her grip on the blaster tightening. Together they moved, Marcus leading the way with surgical precision. He used the environment to his advantage, firing and moving in a deadly rhythm. The enforcers fell one by one, their attacks unable to match Marcus's ruthless efficiency. But the turrets were another matter. Their automated systems tracked Marcus and Lila relentlessly, forcing them to duck and weave through the debris-strewn corridor. Marcus's mind raced, calculating angles and trajectories. He spotted a vent above the nearest turret and made his decision. "Cover me," he told Lila, handing her a flash grenade. "When I say throw this at the turret. Aim for the sensors." She hesitated, then nodded. Marcus moved, darting toward the vent. The turret swiveled to track him, its barrels glowing with deadly energy. "Now?" Marcus shouted. Lila threw the grenade, her aim true. The device detonated in a burst of blinding light, overloading the turret's sensors. Marcus leapt, grabbing the edge of the vent and hauling himself up. From his new vantage point, he fired a precise shot into the turret's power core, disabling it. "Good throw," he said, dropping back down. Lila managed a small, tense smile. The maintenance hatch was just ahead, but Kaler wasn't done playing his hand. A squad of elite enforcers blocked the way, their armor thicker and their weapons more advanced than the grunts Marcus had dispatched earlier. They moved with coordination, their formation tight. "Stay behind me," Marcus said. He activated his ion blade, the weapon's blue glow casting sharp shadows across the walls. The fight was brutal. The elite enforcers were skilled, their weapons calibrated to pierce even reinforced armor. But Marcus was faster, stronger, and utterly relentless. He wove through their ranks like a phantom, his blade carving arcs of light as it cut through armor and bone. Lila watched in awe and horror as her father dismantled the squad, his movements almost too fast to follow. Within minutes it was over. The last enforcer fell, his weapon clattering to the floor. Marcus deactivated his blade, breathing heavily but steady. He turned to Lila, his expression softening for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her eyes lingered on the carnage around them. "Yeah. Let's just get out of here." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're almost there." They reached the maintenance hatch and climbed through, emerging onto the station's exterior. The nebula stretched out before them, a swirling sea of color and light. The Erebus hovered nearby, its stealth systems active but ready. "Hold on," Marcus said, securing Lila to his tether. Together they launched into the void, the silence of space a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. The tether reeled them in, and within moments they were back aboard the ship. Marcus didn't waste time. He strapped into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. The Erebus roared to life, its engines flaring as it sped away from the station. Behind them, the Syndicate's base shrank into the distance, its weapons firing blindly into the nebula. Lila sank into the co-pilot's chair, her body trembling as the adrenaline wore off. "We made it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We're not done yet," he said. "Kaler's not going to let this go. And neither am I." Lila looked at him, a mix of fear and admiration in her eyes. She understood what he meant. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about sending a message. Marcus Strain didn't run from anyone. And the Zarek Syndicate was about to learn that the hard way. The Zarek Syndicate's fleet mobilized the moment the Erebus emerged from the nebula. Dozens of ships fanned out like a swarm of predatory insects, their engines flaring bright against the swirling backdrop of ionized gas. At their center was the Vindicator, a massive battlecruiser bristling with weapons and shields thick enough to repel most attacks. Rex Kaler's flagship. Marcus Strain studied the tactical display on the Erebus's console, his expression carved from stone. The Syndicate had underestimated him once, and now they thought overwhelming force would do what cunning could not. They would learn their mistake, one way or another. Lila sat beside him, her face pale but resolute. The events of the last few hours had stripped away the last of her innocence. She wasn't a helpless captive anymore, she was a survivor. And as she watched her father prepare for battle, she began to understand why the galaxy spoke his name in whispers. "Lila," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to need to help me. Are you ready for this?" She nodded, gripping the edge of her seat. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus activated the ship's weapons systems, the hum of power generators filling the cockpit. "I need you to monitor the shields and reroute power where it's needed. The Erebus can't take sustained hits, so we're going to have to move fast and hit harder." Lila swallowed hard but nodded again. "Got it?" The Erebus surged forward, a sleek shadow against the Syndicate's fleet. The first wave of enemy fighters broke formation, their weapons lighting up the void. Marcus twisted the controls, the Erebus spinning and diving with impossible agility. Plasma bolts streaked past them, close enough to make the hull vibrate. "Shields at 90%, Lila reported, her hands flying over the controls. "Redirecting power to the forward arrays." "Good work," Marcus said, his voice steady. He fired a volley of missiles, each one finding its mark. Syndicate fighters exploded in brilliant bursts of fire, their wreckage spinning into the void. But the real challenge was the Vindicator. The battlecruiser loomed in the distance, its weapon systems locking onto the Erebus. Marcus knew he couldn't face it head-on. The Vindicator had enough firepower to obliterate entire fleets. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. The tactical display beeped as Marcus's eyes scanned the enemy formations. He spotted a weak point, a cluster of smaller frigates forming a defensive line in front of the Vindicator. If he could punch through them, he might have a chance to exploit the battlecruiser's limited maneuverability. "Lila, I'm going to need you to overload the aft thrusters on my mark," Marcus said. "We're going to punch through their line." "But won't that leave us exposed?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Only if I miss," Marcus replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Trust me." Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. On your mark." The Erebus streaked toward the frigates, its weapons blazing. The Syndicate's ships fired back, their plasma bolts hammering the Erebus's shields. Lila's fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power to keep the shields intact. The cockpit filled with the sound of alarms and the occasional groan of the ship's hull under pressure. "Now?" Marcus shouted. Lila hit the controls, and the Erebus surged forward with a burst of speed that left the pursuing fighters scrambling. The ship wove through the frigates, its plasma cannons tearing through their defenses. Explosions lit up the void as the frigates' hulls buckled under the assault. Marcus didn't slow down. He pushed the Erebus to its limits, maneuvering the ship into the shadow of the Vindicator. The battlecruiser's weapons couldn't target them this close, and the smaller ships couldn't risk firing without hitting their flagship. "Lila, find me a weak spot in their hull," Marcus said. "We're going to take this thing down." Lila scanned the battlecruiser's schematics, her eyes narrowing. "There's a vulnerability near the main reactor. If we can get a missile through their venting system, it'll cause a chain reaction." Marcus nodded. "Good. Load the coordinates into the targeting system." Kaler's voice crackled over the comms. "Strain, you're a fool if you think you can win this. You and your daughter are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now and I might consider sparing you." Marcus didn't bother responding. Words were a waste of time. He adjusted the Erebus's trajectory, lining up the shot. The targeting system locked onto the venting system, a flashing red indicator marking the weak point. "Lila, fire when ready," Marcus said. She hesitated for only a moment before pressing the button. The missile launched, streaking toward the Vindicator like a predator closing in on its prey. The Syndicate's point defense systems fired desperately, but the missile was too fast, too precise. The impact was immediate. The Vindicator's venting system exploded in a cascade of fire, the chain reaction ripping through the battlecruiser's core. Secondary explosions followed, tearing the massive ship apart from the inside. The Vindicator shuddered, its hull splitting open as flames and debris spewed into the void. Kaler's voice cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. The Syndicate's fleet faltered, their formation breaking as panic set in. Marcus didn't give them a chance to regroup. The Erebus darted through the chaos, its weapons finishing off the remaining ships. Within minutes, the battle was over. Lila stared at the tactical display, her eyes wide. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. "It's not over," he said. "The Syndicate's bigger than just one ship. They'll come for us." Lila looked at him, her fear replaced by determination. "Then let them come," she said. "They'll learn the same lesson Kaler did." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. "That's my girl." The Erebus turned away from the wreckage, its engines burning bright as it disappeared into the depths of space. The Syndicate had made a fatal mistake, and Marcus Strain had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. You don't take what belongs to him and live to tell the tale.